family does that all the time, so I'm used to it. It's not a problem if that happens. Hi, everybody. Really honored to be here. Thank you very much, Katie, for the invitation. Super excited. My name's Michael Mullen. There's just one of me. It's not Mullins. Not that it's a big deal, but you only want one of me. It's about it. So my background's pretty extensive, as Katie mentioned. You can probably tell by the gray hairs that I've been kind of in the industries for quite some time. I have a pretty strong orthopedic rehabilitation background. I worked in outpatient orthopedics for a long, long time, and then started my own business about 5 years ago, where I do kind of like an integrative model of kind of rehabilitation and training. I want to get people strong and fit, but help them manage their injuries, ailments, and problems. And I see a lot of very complicated people that haven't had success with a lot of the very traditional models that medicine and therapy provides in today's world. So as Katie knows, I'm a little bit of an out-of-the-box thinker, which is why we get along so well. We spent a lot of time over our years just trying to develop different ways of approaching managing people, training them, getting them fit and strong, but also understanding how the body works, because I think that that's a very important element that's kind of lost in our current models. So we went back and forth with a couple of different ideas. I thought I'd kind of share a little history and misconceptions of posture, just because I think that it's an interesting topic. It is extensive in terms of how long the concepts have been around and the different ways that it has evolutionized over the years, over the centuries, and the different ways that different perceptions have come to understand it. I have this massively fat book called Stand Up Straight, A History of Posture. It's not exhaustive. Certainly anything I'm going to provide today is not going to be exhaustive, but I hopefully helps to kind of maybe explain some of the ways that we've kind of gone over the years and some of the directions we've gone in an effort to try and create a better understanding about what's ideal for the human body. From a standpoint of what we think of posture, I'll save some of that stuff towards the end, because I'm pretty confident Katie and I feel pretty similarly in terms of our understanding about this token word posture that everybody has this tendency to kind of get focused on. I'll apologize a little bit because I have some things that are kind of, I can't get my animations to work, so I was trying to get the whole PowerPoint up. So some of the things you'll kind of see all at once, which might take a little bit of the, maybe laughter moment out of it, but hopefully it'll help to explain things a little bit. So, what is posture? If you think about it and you really think about the way that people use the word posture, it's used a number of different ways. We talk about posture from the physical sense, from the standpoint of someone talking about a position that someone should be in, a way that someone assesses someone in standing or in sitting. But we also talk about it in elements of like a verb, like posturing yourself a certain way, and the way that someone can posture themselves to manage a certain situation. So from a standpoint of being a position a person's body in, or a characteristic way of bearing one's body and carriage, it becomes a conscious thing. There's a mental component. There's an outward behavioral attitude. And the behavioral element is pretty significant for some people because of the perceptions that they've come with over the years, either as a result of their upbringing, the environment they're in, the society they're placed in, their jobs, and the way that things are assumed, if you would. And we'll talk about those things in just a little bit. So what does posture entail? So, I put down like a list of a few different things. There's a perception of it. I spend all day long with my clients, having them appreciate and understand their change in perception when I put them into a certain position after we've gone through a couple of activities that allow their body to be in a new position, and how foreign it feels. How many times they feel like they're slouching, or they're not in the right position to be because of either their perception of what they had been having for a long period of time, or because of the perception as to what they feel society tells them they need to be doing from a standpoint of erect positions and shoulder blades back and chins chucked in and things like that. But as you'll discover through some of these slides, there's a moral action too, and how it's been viewed for many, many years from a standpoint of your upbringing and what it might reflect in terms of your societal influence and your societal stature. It can also become a physical reaction. So if I said to any of you right now, like, okay, show me what you think good posture is, you'll assume a position and you'll get into this physical reaction of, oh, posture, I have to sit a certain way, just based upon the very word itself. But it does also reflect a little bit of self-control. How does the body be able to manage itself much differently than, as you can tell, some of these postures from this previous slide, that they are all postures that you can tell are markedly different than these young men are demonstrating in this picture, and we'll talk about this picture in just a little bit. There's an element of upbringing. There's an element of character. It's an element of who we are and whom we think we can become as humans. It's a measure of how much we can integrate ourselves into society and the environment that we're in, and how we want to present ourselves at certain times and certain situations to our peers, to our other professionals, or to people who we're trying to have conversations and dialogue with. We move muscles, we move ligaments, but there's a mental component that this talks about. And that's where the final word ambiguous comes from. There's no real place to be. It's not one place that we want to try and get the body to learn to be. It's a comfort level of a range and a region that a lot of the activities that Katie has you doing in her empowerment classes are helping you be able to achieve with much more success, with less thought and effort. So this was going to be a little better if we had the animation, but from a postural evolution perspective, you can kind of, people have always seen this upright man. When we came from this low position right here as a and developed into the Homo sapiens species and became more upright and bipedal, we did it for a lot of different reasons, but it allowed us to be able to assume our superiority over the other species. It allowed us to become much more tangible with our hands, to be able to create more activities for hunting, for gathering, for child rearing, for all the things that we needed to be able to do that over time we could develop as a species. I'm sure people have seen this as well too, where they have the person that gets upright and then we start looking down and then we get stuck behind desks, because it's fairly clear, which we'll talk about in a little bit, that we're not supposed to be sitting the amount of time we're supposed to be sitting. We weren't brought up and evolutionized on this planet with chairs. That stuff we created. And we created it in an attempt to try and create comfort and ease with good intentions, but there can be a lot of issues that can come with that, which we'll discuss in just a little bit. And then of course the Homo sapien, which is the development of Homer from The Simpsons. So, back in the early writings, in the early cave dwellings, Mesopotamian era, you can see everything's very erect, everything's very fine lined. Everything talks about, it looks like from a grid's perspective. The Egyptian pictures and the early drawings, you can tell, show very straight lines versus flowing natures, as we just discussed a little bit earlier with those other pictures that we saw, all the way up into the future, where now you have Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker in their similar Egyptian poses. But this is how we perceive things. If you really think about Egyptian times, this is your picture of it, because you have no other concept. There's no photographs to be able to kind of see how people lounged around or carried themselves. So this becomes a further depiction mentally in the psyche about a way that people are supposed to begin to try and carry themselves. So Nefertiti in this picture right here is a picture of one of the Egyptian goddesses, and you can see she has a very forward position, very forward head position from this model. She clearly was in this position for a period of time in order to have them make this, but you can see the amount of neck muscle activity she has because of the heavy headdress she has to wear. But how this looks beautiful with this long neck, but how from a standpoint of overall function, it's not ideal. And how from an Egyptian royalty perspective, they had low abdominal tone from these drawings. They had forward protruded head. They had locked knees. They were in positions that they depicted from this artist's rendition of this was their rendition of what they were about. And you can see as we go a little bit further into some of these things, again, they become very, very descriptive of fine, straight, upright positions. Even though they're in an offset position, they've created everything in a symmetrical, balanced, too stiff, too easy element, which is what, again, gets ingrained into our brains. As you can see from these different types of sculptures that were done here. You can even see the noses were lost at that point. That's just as a side note, that's called iconoclastic components, meaning they used to knock noses off stuff to try to show superiority, to try and show that they were defacing other people's icons as a result to show superiority. It's another form of posturing that they did to try and help to create their superiority in their species, or in their tribes. So if we compare the royalties from the laborers, these depictions show something markedly different. These show people who have to carry things. They have to lift, they have to carry, they have to pull, they have to push, and how their bodies have created a carriage that's much more vertical, but not too stiff. The spine is elongated. They have flush abdominals from the rib cage. Their behind is behind, so they sit with good backside muscles to be able to create good strength. They have shoulders back in these positions. Again, now these are just depictions that some artists did, but they're also elements of what they saw at the time and what their impression was that had this carryover. If we go a little deeper into what we call contrapposto, contrapposto is an Italian term, which basically means your weight is unequally distributed. This is where things got a little bit more casual compared to these, where you had people that were in an offset position, but here they are now, you can see much more casual. They're lean to one side. Their body's a little bit more off axis. There's an element of casualness and relaxation that you can see in this picture of Venus as well as of David and the other guy who I'm not exactly sure who that is. And if you do look at paintings and you look at different types of sculptures, you'll also notice that many times they're posing in a very similar fashion. Many times I'll see a right lotus stance with people. That typically is the way that the body has a propensity to orient itself anyway, which is another topic for another day. But there's an element of how that becomes depicted through different types of paintings as well as different sculptures that were contrived over the years. So we're going to skip a couple thousand years here and kind of jump forward. So now we're back into the more like the 16th century, where again, now we're getting to the military element. So now we have these people thinking about it from a military might perspective. And how if you think about George Washington crossing Delaware, if he was slumped on one knee, what that would look like. Very different image, very different representation of him as a powerful general. Similar to him, nice erect postures. This position where Benedict Arnold and this other gentleman with the hands in the shirt, which I understand means it's basically kind of standing with your hand in your pocket, just what they did back then. But this is a great example of what happens when he lost. And you can see how just the very way he positions himself tells an entire story compared to what this exudes, and how posture can tell a lot more in terms of what it's describing in terms of the situation above and beyond what we think it does. So if we talk about the beauty or vanity of it all, you know, we can get into like corsets. So there's an element of the corsets that have been around for centuries and centuries. Back to ancient Greece times, there were things that women, obviously, not men, were suggested to wear to help capture the waist, to pull things in tighter, to create a look that was desired by many in royalty. These changes changed on royalty preference. Some of them changed the different ways that the structures of the corsets were based upon decrees that were handed down over the generations from one ruler to another and from one region to another. The middle to lower class, aspiring to try and create this look and aspiring to the beauty that is royalty, started wearing these things as well too. And over time, they were realizing that this was actually quite problematic as it was crushing organs and began to create issues with women passing out and actually causing physical long-term damage to their spines as well as their internal structures because of this. But beauty often won out over some of the clear dangers of it just because of the aesthetic element of it. And so this is a quote from something I was reading. Collapsed or poor posture represented immorality, stupidity, poor character, and led to things like masturbation and other failures of self-control. I mean, that's a bold statement to think that that's the image people will have based upon how they present themselves in life. So around the 17th century, 18th century, as these things are starting to kind of change, and in particular the late 18th century, when they're beginning to kind of say, hey, maybe these things aren't the best thing in the world, other things are changing too. Society's beginning to change. People are starting to kind of head to the cities now, the metropolitan areas. So there's less of a rural dwelling and more of an urban dwelling. So as a result of that, all the city stuff begins to take place, which includes obviously dress, appearance, as well as the way that they'll present themselves to their societal peers in such an environment. Around the same time, if you'll notice these things called seats, as I alluded to before, chairs, couches, for, again, hundreds of thousands of years, this was the way that chairs, for the most part, were designed, except for like thrones. Very stiff, very rigid in their ability to be able to support a body. Even right down to couches, you can see the limited amount of upholstery and padding there is underneath there. Firm structures with wooden bases, and you can kind of picture 17th, 18th century furniture. That's what they all look like. But it was around the 1800s and later 1800s that things began to change a little bit, and we began to lounge around a little bit more. And you can see the change in the chairs and the upholstery and the amount of padding that now suddenly allow us to lounge, sink, become less supported, have our systems become less and less active in its attempt to even do something as simple as sitting. The analogy I tell people is the brain is looking for efficiency all day long, is constantly looking for the most comfortable easiest, convenient way to do everything so it can manage the task at hand. And as a result of that, the sense of comfort takes precedence over what is ideal for body positions. As a result of the way that these things have changed, society began to change. And so now it became a little bit different. Now we're starting to kind of take on the commercialism aspect of things. And we wanted these finer items. And finer usually meant less advantageous for the body. What else is happening around the same time is that now suddenly we have children going to school. Now they're forced out of the fields. Now they're actually forced to go to school. So as children who grew up in very active environments and were able to play all day long and help their parents growing food and spend time in the field, the Industrial Revolution is in full swing. Mass industrialization of food. So now they don't need to be doing that because they can buy it much easier. And so around the late 1800s, as these kids are going to school, their teachers are starting to recognize, they're like, these kids are lazy. They're lying around on the desks. Their posture is terrible. They're sitting in these wooden chairs and they're lounging on the desk. And so they begin to be more concerned about it for a number of reasons, only partially because of their health. A lot of it was because the moralistic societal influence that they continued to feel was an integral part of their child's upbringing. No longer are they at home getting these lessons from their parents all day long. Now they're getting this information from the school. It became such an issue that they did a lot of research. And this woman, Jessie Bancroft, wrote this book called The Posture of School Children, which came out around the late 1800s. That the American Posture League was started, try to create standards and information and education to try and talk about the ill wills of poor posture that could happen over time. And then they started to literally screen the children. So the children were screened for these plumb line stick positions to be able to create upright positions. They were tested, what they called a triple test. So they would actually have them do it in gymnastics class where they would stand and compare it to this stick to try and determine how well they stood for periods of time. They did marching tests to try to see, can they maintain that good standing position that we're looking for? Verticality, not movement, verticality, while marching for 3 to 4 minutes at a time. And then the third test was actually an exercise test where they actually put the child through different movements to try and see, can they maintain this nice vertical, upright, proper posture while moving arms in different directions and being able to move the body in different directions. And then they literally divided the children into 2 different divisions, Division 1 and Division 2. Sound familiar? And so over time, as the body, as this became the norms in the schools, now there became a competition of sorts. How well could I do to get myself to Division 1? Division 2 students became more and more concerned of their status of being a Division 2. So they strived to be in this Division 1, which was the goal of what the entire process was all about. They went through this educational program demonstrating the difference if you hold books all on one side, how that makes the body stand askew, because scoliosis is not an okay thing. Since Aristotle times and Socrates times, they've been recognizing scoliosis as a major problem in human health. Some of them even suggesting for many years that it was actually a disease of the mind as well, which I'll show in a picture in just a moment. But how these changes in the body position was supposed to create a better alignment. And to some degree, there's total validity to that. There's total validity to that. So they would have them do exercises in school to try and help to improve this vertical position. They literally had them doing crunches at their desks to try to help to improve the strength of the musculature to be able to hold them more upright, not recognizing that there might be other systems that are influencing the ability to maintain good posture. But this health issue and the concern that they had for the children's overall well-being was significant. So then they said, okay, now go play in the playground. And so these are the playgrounds of the era. So they're concerned about them not sitting up straight in school because they're concerned of their health. But do you see these jungle gyms and gymnastic sets? It's crazy. But that's the way that it was. And I'm sure they're on cement. I mean, I'm sure they're on cement. You know what I mean? So from a standpoint of the hypocrisy of it sometimes is kind of intriguing. So even the assumptions, people get into bold assumptions. So they do scare-tastic, you know what I mean? So you have a picture here of a child, looking down at an ogre with tuberculosis in a club. Poor posture encourages tuberculosis, erect carriage combats it, right posture acquitted. It's like the whole element of selling something for the parents to help to continue to try and maintain that child rearing element of stature that they felt was very important. And they even came out with these things that talked about the degree of how you moved your body and carried your body were labeled to these levels, which I found incredible, and how judgmental it was, and how much this became ingrained in the parental psyche back early in the early 1900s. That being said, there were people that were alternative thinkers, which is awesome. I'm sure a lot of you are aware of Montessori schools, but Maria Montessori was an Italian woman who, in the late 1800s, started to recognize the influence that children being in school and being static and sitting at chairs had on the body. And she created a whole wide range of postural pathologies in her book she wrote out called Pedagogical Anthropology. And one of her quotes is, "The school itself causes this predisposition. In fact, the sitting posture and prolonged confinement in a closed environment impede the normal development of the thorax and all the physical powers in general." Like, you want to kiss her. Like, she finally understood the influence of figuring out and recognizing that free play and free movement was an integral part of the children's health, but also the mental health. Thus, the Montessori school systems, which started in 1911, which is the very first one in upstate New York that was demonstrated. She even had a quote that said, "The most studious scholars have wretched chest measures and a muscular force so low as to threaten their constitutions." So people were labeled as those that were more studious had a tendency to not have good body ability because of how much time they spent sitting, reading, studying, and learning. So there's a mixed bag of information the kids are getting here. Wait a minute, you want me to do good in school? By the same token, if I do that, you're worried about my wretched chest measures? Another one of my favorite forward thinkers was Mabel Ellsworth Todd. She started doing work back in the late 1800s and early 1900s, also very, very dynamic in her thought process, realizing that the way that the body was supposed to work goes against the grains of what current medicine and current teachings were teaching. She took the military posture element that was so prevalent around that time with, again, corsets still being around, but slowly phasing out, and the way that people were told to stand in school. And she'd like to offer the term postural patterns. Should the term seem to convey a fixed outline or shape, recall that the body, like all other known objects on Earth, is continuously subject to the pull of gravity and to inertia and must incessantly meet them. The shape or pattern of the body is a moving one, dynamic, not static. So again, we think of posture to this day as a static position that we're supposed to assume. She did work in her studio in New York City for a long time, having people crawling around her studio, having people reach and lift and rotate and move, and understanding how to, I love the word undulate, how to undulate and kind of weave and coil. And it was groundbreaking for the work she was doing in terms of the changes she was getting for people who had significant pain and problems and injuries. Of interesting side note is that as the medical establishment became further and further developed in New York City around the early 1900s, they basically ran her out of the city, threatening to sue her, saying she wasn't licensed to do what she was doing, although all she was doing was teaching people to understand how to use their bodies better, much like Moshe Feldenkrais, much like so many other people that were groundbreakers. I spoke a little bit before about scoliosis as well, too, and Krista Schroth is another practitioner who was a forward thinking, and she was in the early 1900s. Her mother was a physical therapist and specialized working with scoliosis people, using breath work and understanding how to manipulate breath work and different strapping and ladder positions to get people to change their scoliotic curvatures, because some of these people were literally put into insane asylums because they thought that it was an element of their mental disease and mental health, as we talked about before with that previous picture. So she took the information from her mother and developed schooling and treated tens of thousands of students through her own clinic, teaching people to learn to move, to breathe, to rotate, to self-manage, because medicine had failed them. In its attempt to try and manage it, they had literally abandoned them. So around this time, around the 40s or so, I'm sure some of you at least are familiar with these somatotypes, the endomorph, the mesomorph, and the ectomorph. And these are attributed to a William Sheldon, whose research consisted of a lot of anthropological studies. Did a lot of photographing of people, created this whole book called Atlas of Men, where he came up with these 3 different somatotypes. And if you look at the character and what they suggest, and the shape and what they suggest, again, that initial slide I talked about, that talked about it from a judgmental perspective, it's pretty significant. Active, assertive, vigorous, combative, versus quiet, fragile, restrained, sensitive, relaxed, tolerant, peaceful, comfort loving. There's just judgments that were placed upon it. And his Atlas of Men broke these down significantly more. But his research, although still questioned today the validity of some of these things in terms of the actual implications it has on being able to understand things, started a phase where now we started to look for the ideal type of somatotype. We're looking for this progression of the race, for the healthy race. Mr. Sheldon actually, for many years in the 50s, was allowed at many Ivy League schools to photograph the freshman students that came into their schools. Yale, Harvard, Vassar, Ivy schools. He took hundreds of thousands of photographs of unclothed children, front, side, and back, with no explanation, no understanding from anybody, including administration, about what he was doing, why he was doing it. No research was quoted. There was one student who finally went home and told her mom, hey, by the way, this guy did this. And he'd been doing it for about 8 to 10 years. There was an interesting story that came out in the New York Times about 2 months ago on this. This woman who was photographed said, I wonder what the hell happened to all these pictures, because there are a number of people who I think we all know by name, who I'm pretty sure were photographed. And so his name, all his work was discredited because of all of the shame that he was left as a result of that. That's a side note, but just to show you the degree with which the judgmental aspect of things and how much was accepted at certain parts of our lives or certain eras of our lives played a role in some of the things we did. So that brought us to judgment, or eugenics. This took place over a period of time around the 40s, in the late 40s, early 50s, partially supported by the Nazi regime with the art of human genetics, but it was prevalent in America as well too. This is from August 1929. Eugenics is the study of all agencies under social control which may improve or impair the inborn qualities of future generations of man, either physically or mentally. Some of that is what the work that Dr. Sheldon based his work on, was to create this ideal matching of physical and mental attributes to create this ideal race, if you would. So much so that you can become, I call it, judgment certified. This guarantees that I've examined the gender of this card and find a perfect physical and mental balance in unusually strong eugenic love possibilities, well fitted to promote the happiness and future welfare of the race. I'm not even going to go down that road today. I had a couple slides on it, but race is a massive element of posture and judgment for thousands of years. I'll just leave it at that to say I don't feel like getting into it, but that's a perfect example of what it's all about. So let's talk about how it becomes sexist. Can we talk about that? How many men have you ever seen try to balancing books on their heads? You ever seen classes for that? Yeah, I don't think so. Vassar College, all women's school, for decades was teaching how to be ideal in society, teaching them how to be able to stand and carry themselves a certain way, because the condemnation of morals, character, and beauty was especially present in women, who were judged to lack sexual restraint as well as social and aesthetic grace if they did not conform to posture standards. So, we've got sexism, we've got race, we've got genetics, we've got a host of things that have taken this concept and sullied it, in my mind. So the Chiropractic Association wanted to get into it. So I'm not bashing the Chiropractic Association, but back in the 40s, early 50s, where they were trying to get into society for their treatment approaches, they created this International Posture Queen, Miss Perfect Posture contest that happened regularly, that they would run it and they would look at their x-rays and see how other x-rays were and how do they carry themselves. And you can see this very unnatural, unrealistic movement perspective of, I'm sure, what Katie has taught you is not an ideal way to be able to lift weight from a standpoint of being able to be ideal. And of course, guess who's making the judgments? I mean, obviously, there's no women involved in this process. But from a standpoint of, I'm not trying to get anybody too wired and ironed up, but just from a standpoint of recognizing kind of the institution that it's created and the extreme dysfunction it's created, is pretty significant. So this one would have been better if I could have clicked through it, but basically, we have these things now is what we see. 10 ways to improve your posture naturally. So there's that exact position to today's world, much like they basically are demonstrating in these exact pictures of what it's supposed to look like. We have someone who's not terrible, actually really pretty good in that position, and actually in their effort to make him better, in my mind, are making him worse. So they're jacking up a system into a complete imbalance, making him look more muscular. He looks more intimidating. He looks more powerful. I am not doubting that at all. But if I were to assess his movement qualities and his capabilities, I bet he went from here and got worse as he got there, with all due respect. And then the influence of this was going to be, and obviously this guy looks, not nearly strong enough to hold his whole weight up against gravity. You know what I mean? So he definitely needs that thing to hold him and support his frame, because he's clearly not strong enough. Now, to that point, I'm not against tools. I use tape on people's back. They got those little beeper things. Great. You like technology? You want a little beeper thing just to tell you to change position? I'm perfectly fine with. Some people need these tactile cues or little reminders to help them change their position when they feel too much of a directional change. But I like to go about it differently, and more times than not, Frank, almost all the time, we're able to get there much more successfully without the need of so much of these extra props. And if you really think about this position and this position, do you think either of them would be successful doing that with that rigid of a frame? They would not be able to walk on uneven terrain barefoot. Two of them, you can't tell, pregnant. They would not be able to carry these things like this if they were so stiff that they couldn't, again, wobble and undulate and have their bodies be able to move and flow over the ground and over the terrain. So from a standpoint of looking at a picture versus recognizing the implications that it has for overall function is pretty significant. So I kind of like this. I thought it was kind of a good idea. There's this perceived importance of posture, and I'm not doubting for an iota the research that's come out about head carriage and head position and its influence on respiratory exchange, or the influence that poor postural positioning over time can have on creating compression on the anterior chest wall, literally limiting the way that your lungs can breathe and chest can expand. The influence on kyphosis and extreme rounding of the upper back can have on overall movement and mortality, actually has been attributed to as well too. I'm not ignorant of that, but it's because things weren't put into place early enough through the child rearing years and through the development of our bodies as we grew upright to be able to combat this more effectively. From a standpoint of its actual importance, I think it's way less an importance element of what you perceive posture to be versus more your body's ability to get to better positions, which we'll talk about in just a little bit. So I kind of wrote this up. I thought it was a nice little kind of depiction. Again, you saw two slides now that show balancing rocks. These are not all the same rocks that are all balanced, stacked on top of each other. If I went and just kind of tapped on the top, they would wobble. Can you appreciate that? So they're stacked in a position that they're stable, but they can wobble, they can move. If the wind blew, they'd be able to adjust to the wobble. Would they be stiffer and be able to withstand it better if they were all stacked on top? Of course they would. But what are we looking for with the human system? Are we looking for stiffness and rigidity? Or are we looking for some degree of stability that comes with a little bit of wobble? So in my mind, a balanced system is one that has the ability to move and function through multiplanar positions and velocities with the least amount of resistance or stress, meaning the body that has to move through too much limited motion and mobility because of over compression, over muscle activity, over rigidity, in my mind, is not going to be able to create the optimal movement we're looking for, even just to be able to navigate our day-to-day lives, let alone performance levels. This occurs at multiple levels simultaneously while maintaining control for the redistribution of position and forces. Can I have someone be able to manage their body position, and if something changed that, perturbed it, adjusted it, kitty med ball throws, whatever, something like that, can your body adapt and adjust to that and have the capacity to be able to do it without rigidity? I tell people pretty regularly, in my mind, my opinion of balance and good balance has way less to do with stillness and rigidity of balance and more about, can you keep yourself moving around a central point? You've got this range that you can work through that if you begin to lose your balance, you can kind of correct and pull yourself back in. Because if I have someone step a little bit funny and lose their balance, if they don't have that adaptability and they're just stiff, then they go down harder because they can't roll, they can't adjust, they can't adapt to that change in what happened in their environment. So here's some examples. I thought I'd put some examples up. So example number one here, this woman right here is a good example of kind of day one. That's her standing position. That's what she thought was straight. That's how she rested herself. And can you appreciate the more sway backed position with the hips forward position? She's someone who would be in my clinic that says, oh, my hip flexors are tight all the time. I stretch them all the time. They never loosen up. And she's probably spot on. But it has less to do with the flexibility of that and more that they're constantly under strain. In fact, they're saying, if I don't prevent you from doing, if I don't do what I'm doing, I'm going to have your whole hips are going to fall forward. So they are tight because they're too active. In an effort to try to get her, we got her a little bit straighter at that first session. You can see the clothes are the same, the little thing in the background is the same, but she's not there naturally yet. So when you followed up with her about a week later and she's able to do the activities that we went through, you can see she's in a much more relaxed position. She's not struggling to be there anymore. We got her back to open up. We got her rib cage to anchor down. We got her to understand and appreciate how to change her internal body positions in a more balanced and evenly distributed way so she could wobble. That can't wobble. That's only going back. This can wobble. So this is a good example of the influence that activities can have on what we'll call posture. And can you see how aggressively down he is on that side? On that right side, he's just, well, he's a hockey player. And he grew up since he was a young little kid playing hockey. So how, with that position that he's in all the time, without having anything that's going to teach him to learn to do something the other way, not become a problem? It's a problem because he's seeing me. If he made it to the NHL and he's like that and he's never had injuries, it's not a problem. But he did sacrifice something. He had to. That's what happens as we start to kind of push the envelopes a little bit to try and improve our performance to some degrees. Can we keep it in check? Which is why the brilliant name of the program you're in is Empowered Performance, because she's developing the empowered nature to you to be able to capture performance and not have it get too out of hand. How about that for a plug, Katie? Was that pretty good?
I'm using that as my elevator pitch now because I don't have one. So thank you.
So this gentleman right here, I mean, he's leaning back. You know, someone basically is riding his back and pulling on horse reins. I mean, he's just like so pulled back and extended. You know, he's a good example. I joke, I was like, dude, you're walking backwards because his arms are swinging backwards. So his ability to be balanced, to be able to have his body move efficiently, you can see he's very compromised. And I'm not giving him a hard time. I clearly don't have his face on here for a reason. But that's a good example of one of the reasons that happens. Because it can, because it's easy, because the stomach and the guts and everything, it's just going to be pushed that way. So if we changed his postural positioning, his body's resting state, he would look, I'm not about aesthetics, just to be clear here, he would look 10 pounds lighter because that distension would be contained. Because instead of it being, sorry, can I get this to do again? Well, anyway, instead of it being pushed forward because he's so arched on his back, he has a capacity to have it be able to be more in the middle, to wobble around. This is a perception issue to the nth degree. So this young lady, true story, had no idea. Yeah, you know what? I think someone told me once I don't move my arm much when I walk. No idea. So from a standpoint of perceptions at times, there are things that I know, and I see Amanda here, and I know other people, there's a couple of faces here, that we navigate throughout our daytimes to bring attention to people that they had no idea. The runner that I saw this morning early on who ran, has chronic hip issues, and her right arm does this, her right arm does this, and her left arm does this. No idea. No idea that every single time she ran, she was twisting into one direction. And when you bring these things to light and give them some strategies they can put into place to try to help manage those forces that are turning them into certain directions to try to navigate gravity, it can be pretty profound. So I've looked hard to try to figure out if this really was what he said, but I think he's super cool and I like this quote, so I put it here anyway. Your best posture is your next posture. And that's everything you're learning. You're learning about movement. You're learning about how to be able to create an optimal body ability, awareness, movement capabilities that even if you have to sit for extended periods of time, allow you the ability to be able to wobble and not get stuck into certain positions. So you can more optimally position yourself for managing gravity and tasks of day-to-day life. This was my quote. Posture is a word humans made up to represent something they made up, to describe a position they made up, to justify a problem they made up. So I'm not bashing it. Again, I want to be clear in my message here. There's a reason that it's been talked about and written about and discussed for centuries. But I think that the misconception that I wanted to bring to people's attention today is that I'm not sure what is perceived as ideal is accurate. The notion of people putting it's still to this day, this is taught regularly in fitness professionals and physical therapy and medical communities, is this straight spine approach. And even ergonomics will go into it. But the research that's coming out more and more is kind of saying, actually, that's actually probably not the best way to position people during the daytime. And maybe having their back up against a wall and jutting their chin in and reducing the neck curvature and having them become in this backboarded type position that literally people used to wear these things where they walked around with these things clipped underneath their arms to keep this constant position engaged all the time is not ideal for human function. Which brings me to my favorite topic, which is breath. So from a standpoint of the things I'd like to kind of talk about now, and Katie, if this stuff has been addressed much in terms of like respiratory mechanics and stuff like that, I'm not going to go too deep, but I'll talk about some intervention strategies. Has that been covered a lot already, or is this good?
No, that would be great. I mean, we're just getting into assessments and having some intervention strategies that are more kind of baseline, rock back,
Awesome.
90, stuff like that.
Great. This will lay the groundwork for that, hopefully. Okay. So I love this book. I just finished reading it. It's phenomenal. It's one of the most validating books I've read in my 20 some odd years of practicing in the field. So there are many ways to breathe as there are foods to eat, and each way we breathe will affect our bodies in different ways. Now, I love that quote from the book, but what it tells is the number of different ways that our brain has strategized survival. The way that we don't think about the way that we move air during our day, 23 to 25,000 times a day, and how this low-level baseline of imbalance, front to back, side to side, top to bottom, occurs over time. And the influence that this imbalance of breathing mechanics, not just the gas exchange part that, kind of sort of matters a lot, but the influence that different expansive and compressive opening and closing, ability to maintain a shape and a canister that's ideal to withstand gravity, to manage forces, to handle load, and how much we have the ability to manipulate it. That's been talked about for thousands of years, but has continued to this day be pushed to the side, is profound. Many modern maladies, asthma, anxiety, ADHD, psoriasis, scoliosis, crooked teeth, obstructive sleep apnea, could either be reduced or reversed simply by changing the way we inhale and exhale. And that is not like an that's not like a statement that I say lightly. I can't stress enough the influence on modifying breath and modifying the way that your body moves, those pressures through your body can have on overall health. And in particular, the stuff that Katie goes through, for those of you that have children, think of how it could be well applied to your children so they learn good habits early, okay? I didn't want to put up anatomy pictures. I didn't want to go that deep into it, but I thought I'd just show a couple videos of the diaphragm functioning from the front and the side. Diaphragm's a dome-shaped structure. It's in the inside of our rib cage. It attaches to our spine on the front. And as we inhale, it contracts and pulls down to open our lungs, hopefully as balanced as possible. And as we exhale, it recoils back up. Many people, this passive recoil has become imbalanced in its attempt to offset the inhalation position that we've established. And I'll demonstrate that in just a minute. So this slide right here, which clearly is not going to play for me. Great. So anyway, it would look like this from the side. So if this is the front of the body, it would contract and kind of pull down like this. And as we exhale, it would dome back up. Inhale, exhale. Abdominals are active. Muscles between the rib cages are active. The second one right here, I wanted to show you, so you could show you the difference between the right and the left side and how each breath this person took, they kind of ascended and descended just a little bit differently, because even though we call it the diaphragm, both sides aren't necessarily quite the same. In fact, if they are, that's another imbalance as someone stacked on top. So the variability of this diaphragm's ability to go up and down is what we're looking for. The variability of being able to establish a position that can contain that. to allow that expansion and compression to take place is the number one way, in my mind, that people can idealize their postural positioning during their daytime. It's one of the most manipulative things you can do that, in my mind, is even more important than strength, because you're not going to get strength well and balanced until you get that thing balanced. As we inhale, I wrote guts on a roll. As we inhale, our organs move a little bit, okay? So our lungs don't just expand like this. There's a little bit of rotation that happens. That's what these arrows are demonstrating. Our liver spins on an axis. So during inhalation, it's the second heaviest organ in our body behind the skin, and it's the most mobile organ inside our body. And in less than 20% of the people does it return to the same starting position every breath. So this thing's like on a roll. This thing's constantly moving. The heart spins. It's on a left axis, and that's what that demonstrates with these arrows. You can tell by the way that the spleens move. You can tell by the way that the pancreas stretches and rotates. So I don't want to get too much in the anatomical piece, but I do want to talk about the way that our internal organs move and why some of the breathing activities we try to establish are trying to manage all that movement, not letting that spinning, not letting that rotation get too out of hand. So that picture of that guy that I mentioned with the belly forward, his are just going all day long, all day long. That's how his body has learned to establish his positions throughout the daytime because of that imbalance. If we look at it from an X-ray perspective, again, this is, we'll call it a normal X-ray, and you can kind of see how it's a little more domed than it is on the left side. So that's someone looking at you. There's the heart. That's the right side. That's the left side. Again, you can kind of see they're just a little bit different shaped. And over the course of time, if breathing imbalances are established long enough, I alluded earlier to Krista Schroth and the work that she did with scoliosis people, and how so much of it was about manipulating breath, and how you can actually see, this is a great depiction of a diaphragm that's different on one side than the other, and how that can pull on a spine because it attaches to a spine and it attaches to ribs, so it can constantly twist us. So the activities and the assessments that we go through are designed to try and help to manage that so that that doesn't get too out of hand. And another good example of looking at it from the side, you can kind of see that dome piece right here. That's the diaphragm looking at it from the side, and how it's a little bit different on that one versus that one. And that's just a representation of that right one being a little bit higher. That's why it's shadowed a little bit higher. But this is a great example of a body that has adapted a different shape and position of a diaphragm. And can you see how that is so pulled aggressively back and down that this person, every breath they take as the diaphragm goes down, is just feeding into the exact issue that got them there to begin with. And how people, if you think about it from a posture perspective, I don't care how many posture exercises I give this person to try and have them stand up straight. If I'm not addressing this, then all day long, it's going to constantly be pulling it out of whack. And they're going to be constantly trying to manage externally issues that are happening internally that, in my mind, are the kind of the primary drivers as to what establishes the imbalances to begin with. So that's when you start talking about breathing. And that's when you start talking about manipulating breath a little bit. So I'll just spend a couple minutes to talk about a couple things I want to have people kind of play with right now, if you want to. When I say the word breathing, I want to have you just try, much like posture, I want to have you just kind of take your mind away from breathing as we know it. I want to have you think about it as a powerful tool that you can use, that you can drive different expansions into different regions, and you can create immense compression and stability and control through the way that you manipulate your inhalation and your exhalation. And just like those x-rays and pictures that I showed there, just to kind of teach a little bit about what we're trying to manage, I want to show you how it might be able to kind of be manipulated in a way that can kind of change your body's resting position, okay? So what I want to do is I want to have people just, not everybody has to, but sit on the front edge of your chair. And I want to have you just keep your feet flat on the ground for me, please. And so you feel just your butt bones. If you're on a soft couch, it might not be as successful. So if you could find a harder chair, that'll be a little bit better, but you'll get the idea if nothing else. And so I'm going to go back to the beginning slide. And I'm just going to say, imagine you haven't heard anything that I've said so far. And just imagine, sit up what you perceive as good posture, or what society has taught us as good posture, or what you've learned from somebody's good posture. And just hold that we're going to hold this for about 5 or 10 seconds, okay? And I want to have you make a mental note of a few things right now. do a check. How much is your back muscles working? If you're not tightening your abdominals, how much are your abdominal muscles working on their own? If you take a breath in for me. And does it feel like your whole chest goes up and forward and your shoulders rise up? Does it feel like your neck tightens a little bit as you inhale? Because these accessory muscles can become very, very active if we're not in an ideal position regularly. Now, everybody slouch for me. I do just the opposite, okay? Take a breath in this position. And I want to show you the difference at how that feels now. It kind of is probably pushing your belly out. It's kind of distending your belly. It's, you know, it's tight. It's more restricted. This was easier. Can I get nods one way or the other? This was easier, okay? So why wouldn't we think that being upright in this position allows it to be easier? Of course it's easier, because we can continue to expand areas that for many people are already overexpanded. So it's easier. Remember I talked about the brain before? Now, I'm not advocating slouching by any stretch of the imagination, but I wanted to do that to demonstrate what happens when we change our shape and how, why would the body ever go to positions where it's hard for me to breathe unless some knucklehead like me is telling you to do it. But I also coach you through ways that you can do it a little bit more successfully. So those of you that have a seat that has a seat back, if you don't worry about it. What I have you do is I want to have you sit with your back just barely touching the seat back, okay? I want to have your feet flat on the ground if possible. If you do not have a seat back, what I want to have you do is just sit where you were before on the front edge of the chair with feeling your butt bones. And again, your butt bones, your two sit bones, try to make sure you feel both. And for regardless of the chair that you're in, do me a favor and just try to feel if you can get your feet flat on the ground. It makes it that much more successful, okay? We're going to be working on a longer, slower, fuller exhalation than you're used to. Some of you, I know, already know this, but I want to work on your body's ability to do a couple of different things, depending upon your body structure, which some of the assessments Katie will be talking about will help you determine. In my mind, pretty much everybody I see has to work on a better exhalation strategy. Some people need to address it because they need more muscles on the outside to help improve the outside shape. Some people need to work on it on the inside so they can work on the doming ability, the diaphragm shape. Either way, they need an exhalation strategy. So exhalation means the diaphragm doming up. And I want to have people feel that the muscles around that rib cage and around the abdominal wall are active, not aggressive, but able to squeeze the tube of toothpaste out so you can expel the air out from underneath. We're also going to be working on end exhalation with pause. For people who are familiar with some of the yoga breathing practices or Buteyko breathing or the oxygen advantage, this guy, Patrick, I'm sorry, my apologies. Advocates, they talk about pausing after end exhalation. And an ideal representation of balanced oxygenation levels comes with your ability to be able to pause for 30 to 40 seconds after you've exhaled a comfortable amount of air. So for those of you that are sitting with your feet flat on the ground, as you just barely bring your body weight forward, so you just barely feel the seat back, you'll probably feel your abdominals work just a teeny bit. Don't go too far forward. Literally, picture in your head, you're pulling the seat back with you. And that should turn your abs on. Can I get nods one way or the other? Most of you will feel it. So do me a favor, in this position, don't change your position, please. Take a breath in for me. For those that don't have a seat back, just keep your feet flat. I want to have you rest your hands on your lower ribs, right here. And as you inhale, don't let these splay out. For everybody, you're going to take that easy breath in, and as you exhale, you're going to blow out more air than you're used to. And if I can keep talking like I am now and speak pretty regularly, then I haven't blown enough. As I get to end exhalation, then you're going to pause for 3 seconds. Don't change your shape as you go to inhale, please. Meaning don't sit up. Go slow, go slow, go slow. You're going to feel restricted. Go slow. After each inhalation, exhale again for me. And as you exhale, blow a little more than you did previously. Take your time, keep blowing. Don't be aggressive about it. Just long, slow, controlled, and pause for 4 to 5 seconds. Do not change your shape Slowly inhale, stay right where you are, go slow, because you're now expanding areas that don't normally expand as easy. So your brain's trying to struggle with that. Each exhale, long, slow, controlled, keep blowing, keep blowing, keep blowing. As you blow more and more, you'll feel the abdominals and pelvic floor muscles engage just a little bit. Don't go after them. They're doing it on their own. Pause as long as you feel safe. Don't change your body position. Slowly inhale. Go slow. Go slow. Exhale again for me. We're going to do it just a couple more times. Going to give you a couple other things to think about. Number one is as you go to blow that air out and you feel things kind of squeeze, your body's going to start to sink a little bit. Let it. Don't fight it. Just let it do its thing. You're going to feel the shoulders drop a little bit. The ribs are going to drop a little bit. You'll pause. Stay there. I don't care how slouchy you think it feels. Stay there. Slow with your inhale. Go slow. You should feel the abdomen and back expanding a little bit. And if you're struggling, then as you inhale, think like you're pushing your guts into your pelvis. That will create expansion into the pelvis, which we need. When we're inhaling, the lungs fill with air. It's the only thing that's filling. That's the thoracic cavity. But the abdomen has to expand and the pelvis has to expand. We need that expansion for guts movement, for fluid movement. We need it for peristalsis, i.e. digestion, for moving things. So if you don't feel like your pelvis is expanding, literally feel like as you inhale, and you'll feel your abdominals activate, trying to push those guts down into the pelvis. So once you've done about 6, 7, 8 breaths, let me know if it feels like number one, can you pause for a longer period of time with less of a mental stress? 2, does it feel like it's able to get air in to places that probably your brain isn't used to feeling expansion occur? Number 3 is you relax and breathe normal. Does it feel like you're resting differently than you did when you first started the activity? I love it when I have a crowd because I can look at nods, but I can't see nods from everybody. So if you notice those subtle little changes, I call this a 5-breath reset. This is what I have my clients do regularly during their daytime. Sitting at their desks, driving their cars, standing outside, waiting to get into the store, wherever they are, just work on that 5-breath reset to bring them back to this baseline. Side note for Katie, I didn't get into ISAs, Katie, about aggressive versus soft, all that. I just talked about the mechanics that I teach everyone pretty much. And then I fine tune it based upon their needs.
This is perfect. Okay. We go into all that detail, but I think having the way that you're coaching the breathing is phenomenal, and just hearing the way that you say it, because we can never hear more different interpretations of that as it registers to different people. The way you're saying it really registered with me.
Yeah, great. So again, I have people use the seat back. And again, I showed chairs before, not because I'm against sitting. It's a fact of life. It's a reason why people can't squat too deep, because we don't go down there enough. But that being said, a seat back, in my mind, should be something you touch against. For those of you that did it, that have a seat back, can you do me a favor and just sit back a little bit and let me know if it feels like you're sitting back as much as you normally would, or if it feels like you don't feel like you need to lean back as much. Because many people will feel like when they're done it, they're like, yeah, like I'm against the back, but I'm not leaning against the back, because all these muscles are a little better engaged, so that next inhale, like, yeah, I got abs, I got intercostals, I got a pelvic floor that's active, and I don't need to use the seat back as much. I tell people I want to have you use it kind of like a support, not something to lean against. I'm correcting car seats with people all day long because they're in this constant leaning back position for comfort and convenience. But when I get them upright, they're like, oh my gosh, yeah, like my neck doesn't hurt anymore and the back feels better, not because they're more vertical, but because they're in a better position for everything to move. So when you can picture this cylinder egg shape that I talked about, and how the cylinder egg shape is balanced, I'm going to use the word posturally, through the ability to expand and compress in as balanced a way as possible, top to bottom, front to back, left to right, and your ability to be able to maintain that shape will allow you to be much more successful with positioning your body however you want during the day. You're going to feel wobbly. I heard the word, I counted last week, 6 times last week. clients of mine got up from treatment and were like, oh my gosh, I feel wobbly. Awesome. That's exactly where you need to be, because now they can move more freely. And believe it or not, we can stack load on that more successfully, because now they have more movement options available to them, so they can offset that depending upon the size of the load and where the load is actually being put. So from my perspective,
a quick question that came up on the chat.
Yeah.
Because I'd love to hear your views on this. It says, feeling.
Okay, so feeling my neck at the end of the inhale coaching, is that what that is? I can't hear you anymore, Katie. You muted yourself, but.
Oh, sorry. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
You're good. Yes. So again, obviously not working with everybody individually to kind of go through all the coaches. I love that question. The diaphragm does 75% of our inhalation, okay? The intercostals are the little muscles between our ribs that also open that up a little bit. We have ones that help open the rib cage, and we have ones that help close it a little bit. We have a little bit of chest, a little bit of serratus anterior underneath our shoulder blades as other muscles that help the inhalation process, and then other accessory muscles up here. If someone doesn't have the mobility, pliability, optimal position to allow the expansion to occur where it's supposed to, from the neck down, there's expansion up here, but just for conversation purposes, from the neck down, and that diaphragm can't do its optimal job, 75% of the work, then you'll begin to rely on the neck muscles more. Instead of them doing 20% of the work, they start doing 35% of the work. So your brain and body most likely are used to inhalation being driven by this. And I could list them, but it doesn't really matter what they're called. So whoever you are, my apologies. I want to have you picture as best as you possibly can. 1, your tongue is resting on the roof of your mouth. 2, inhale as slow as your brain feels safe. So you override the movement of this neck so things can open up and expand. Lungs are elastic by nature. They have stretchability. But if they've been compressed in a number of different places, then they need time for that to occur. And the brain's going to be like, dude, you need oxygen, get the oxygen in. So it's going to override the slowness of trying to create that expansive capability that will allow you to use your neck less. Be almost meditative about it. You're probably someone who'll be much more successful lying down on the ground where gravity is eliminated. I just did this in sitting, so it's just a lot easier to coach this right now. But I've used the same cues lying down. And in your case, I put a little towel roll under your neck to hold your neck in a good position so you're less likely to use your neck. And I would still coach you roughly the same way. And I'd say as you inhale, as soon as you feel your neck turn on, stop. And then take your time with that long, slow, full exhalation. Remember, whenever you're working with this, you're always in charge. Whenever you don't feel safe, whenever it doesn't feel like, you got to do what you need to do. I tell people, tap out at any time. That's no problem. But try to give it time. Be almost interbody. It's what they call interoception. Kind of feel what's happening inside, because you're literally trying to manipulate things into different directions. Remember those organs spinning? If they've been spinning aggressively into one direction consistently, it's going to take time for them to kind of stop doing that quite as much. Did that answer that question?
I think so. Katie, you can let us know if you have more questions about it.
Thanks, Katie. Oh, Katie, are you on a soft cushion? Are you on a cushion like a couch?
Yes, I am.
Yeah, that's probably part of it as well too.
Okay.
But either way, my cues are still, my cues are still the same for you. I'd still get you on your back, a little neck support, because once we tip ourselves away from gravity, this is how we're used to dealing with breathing all the time. When you go to sleep, we go to sleep. But you can manipulate it a little bit easier once you're down, because things have changed a little bit. It's easier to kind of move things around. And then some of the assessments that Katie and interventions that Katie will go through with you will help each of you position yourself into individual ways that will benefit you that much more beneficially. Any other chats, any questions here? You're welcome. Allowing the guts to push into the pelvic floor help make my inhale feel less stuttery. Awesome, that's perfect. Yeah, because and respectfully, knowing this is mostly women, you're taught from a young age, and depending upon the age of some of you, it's all about kegling and pelvic floor contractions. And super important to be able to manage that and that continence issue that it manages. But many times it can become overactive. So during inhalation, when we go down like this, that pelvic floor is supposed to go down. It's supposed to descend a little bit. So the muscles are active, but it's like a negative rep of the bicep. They got to kind of be active, but they got to lower with control. And if they're not able to descend down during inhalation, then that can create a backlog and start shoving everything up. So that little bit of control that you're looking to be able to gain down below is going to come from that longer, slower, fuller exhalation that allows that pelvic floor to be able to contract back up to push the organs up, but then be able to as well accept it kind of like a hammock, to be able to kind of have it come down, but with control. And sometimes I have people manipulate their pelvis position, stuff like that, but that's why most of the time they're lying down or on their side to start, so I can kind of get gravity to be not so much of a factor.
Mike, I have a question for you. So, and this came up this week with one of the mentees, but essentially my question is, especially with a female that's dealing with prolapse symptoms, if they start finding that really concentric tight pelvic floor at the end of a workout is causing the worsening of those symptoms, how do you change up your cueing for relaxing the pelvic floor versus controlling the descension of the pelvic floor during inhalation to mimic more what we want during a workout, if that makes sense? So like one is just, I'm totally relaxed and I'm contracting and relaxing, and the other one is I'm creating the descension of the pelvic floor slowly so that I can manage forces.
Great question. No one answer, but I'll try my best. You know what I mean? So we talked about the diaphragm. So let's just imagine this is the diaphragm from the side. And let's just talk about the pelvic floor from underneath, okay? Depending upon the body position that we're in, let's just say someone is, flatter and more erect in their upper back, like that x-ray that I showed, where that diaphragm is a little bit of a different position. Can you see that that's not stacked on top of the pelvic floor now? So let's say a client has a little more of a forward tilt. So there's more of a forward tilted position. So now you got a bottom that's in that push forward position. So what I'm trying to establish is I'll call it a stacked position, where I'm able to kind of get these two to be able to stack on top of each other. So when I'm cueing people in supine, almost always I talk to them about scooping their tailbone up, like they're pulling from the hamstrings underneath, not flatten the back, but scoop the tailbone. Because then if they're on their side, because they're supported with the diaphragm here, their pelvic floor, regardless of the resting position of the table, is probably going to be in a better starting position. So then as they go to inhale, and I'm like, okay, nice and easy, slow with your inhale, I take time before I address the pelvic piece. I want to make sure, one, that I'm getting proper chest and back expansion. Two, I'm getting, depending upon their needs, good abdominal control first, because anything I try to do with that pelvic floor is not going to be successful if they don't have the abdominal control of those lower ribs to create the proper exhalation. Wides or narrows notwithstanding, you know where I'm going with that, right? So once they're here, then I'm like, great, you got the abs. You feel those? I have them kind of poke at them. Yep, your exhale, you feel those working? Great. Slow with your inhale. Great. See how active they are? Can you feel how these are kind of opening together? Great. Then I work my way down. And as I work my way down, then I say, okay, slowly as you inhale, the person who mentioned the change in dynamics when they felt their pelvic floor expand, when I talked about guts being pushed down, awesome. Slowly, picture you just pushing your guts down into your pelvis. Their abdominals have to be doing that at that stage. You know what I mean? That's the only thing that's going to guide that process from happening. They're in a tilted position, so they're able to establish the position, but the muscles can now drive that load because it's not going to be putting into a different position. And I'll say, okay, as you exhale, nice and easy, great. About halfway out, great. Start feeling like you're doing a little Kegel. Awesome. As you feel those abdominals kick in, just feel like you just contract that pelvic floor just a little bit. Don't over squeeze. Great. Pause. Let it go. Slowly inhale, because I know that it's better engaged now, because those muscle fibers are different of the abdominal and the pelvic region than a lot of other areas. So they got a memory of sorts, not really, but you know what I mean? They can be integrated better. So when I say let go, I'm saying now you should be able to have established, maybe take a couple breaths, established a better balance of that too much or too little element. Did that answer that question?
Yeah, that was great. Thank you.
Okay. So the nose piece, someone wrote about the tongue piece. So I forgot to say one thing. Every single person in the world should learn to breathe through their nose better. And I can't even stress that enough. If you have children, teach them to learn to breathe through their nose. If you catch them walking out with their mouth open, get them to close their mouth. If they sleep with their mouth open, get them to learn to close. Like, I can't stress enough the importance in society for us to breathe through our nose as much and as often as possible. If you got a deviated septum, get nose strips. Get nasal sprays. If you've got a congestion, you've got nasal pharynx issues, go see an ENT. Learn to breathe in and out of your nose. I think I'm pretty clear. Is that good? Number two, when I talked about exhalation through your mouth, it's because you'll be able to get better muscular contraction exhaling through your mouth. But in life, learn to breathe through your nose, even during exercise, as much and as often as you can, because that will, I'll just say, do a lot of really good things. If you want to learn more about it, get that book, Breathe. It's not a heavy read. It's a great read. It's not too techy, but it talks about the studies related to it. You talk about mouth dysfunctions, like it goes, anyway. So to the tongue piece, the tongue, I want it just resting. Some of you won't be able to rest it up there, but if the palate is the roof of the mouth, I want the tongue to be able to rest there. So kind of the front edge of the tongue is kind of resting on the ridge behind the top teeth. So it's not the spot that some people talk about where the tip of the tongue is up there. It should be able to kind of essentially create a seal. And when you create that seal, when I inhale, is very different than if I don't have that seal, where I'm going to be jacked up more. The analogy I tell people is there's connections of that tongue and palate all the way down to your pelvic floor. And it's like suction, like your foot is stuck in mud. And that's what it's doing. It's stabilizing the system. So we get cranial expansion on inhalation, nasal expansion on inhalation, and then all the rest of the way down. We produce something called nitric oxide up in this region, which is great for balance of the body. It creates homeostasis of our lungs by inhaling it. We don't get that when we mouth breathe. And because we swallow periodically during the daytime, when we breathe through the nose, it goes into our digestive system. Again, helping with good balance of that digestive processes. And I'm off my soapbox. Sorry, I just couldn't stress that piece enough, and I didn't get to it before. Anybody have any other questions?
There's a question from Jessica on sleeping aids for children. Nasal strips or mouth tape, is one better for them?
Depends upon the age of the child. If they really have difficulties breathing through their nose, they really should go see someone early in life, because that just compounds. If they have nasal issues, that they have a difficult time, and they have crooked teeth, and people are talking to them about, whatever, braces and all that kind of stuff. I work with a dental sleep specialist and a TMD specialist in another state, because I can't find anybody like-minded here. But they have other things that can open mouths and open arches to allow better expansion, like palate expanders and these other types of things that they can put in there that open this, that helps to open that. So if they're old enough and they want to try taping their mouth, they can. But I typically start with this so they kind of get the idea down, because this can be a little sketchy for them. If it's a young kid and they think it's kind of fun, they can do it during the daytime just to kind of get used to it. But if you're a mother of a young child, every single time you're done nursing or feeding them, close their mouth, catch them. I mean, just try to do whatever you can to try and get that to open up. They do make kind of nasal cones and mutes, which are little nasal expanders. There's a brand of nasal spray I like a lot. It's called X Clear, so it's XCLEAR. Pretty much all natural. Does a really nice job of kind of opening things up a little bit. Spray it, lie on your back for a couple minutes, and it really does a nice job draining. So I tell people, they say, oh, I got a deviated septum, address it anyway. Do whatever you can to breathe through that area, even if it means you do want to eventually go see an ENT or something like that. I really appreciate everybody hanging on, like I really do. My contact information was at the beginning, but feel free. I'm pretty easy to find. Feel free to email me if you've got any other questions or you need any other input. It was a ton of fun.
Mike, can I ask you one more quick question?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, really quick. I'm gonna let you go. Is there such a thing as sternum mobility issue when it comes to breathing? Ivana, what do you mean by that?
Can you step in, Ivana? Tell me a little more, please.
She's probably at work.
Oh God, she can't say anything. Sorry, Ivana. Okay, I'll try to address it. Yes, there are many, many people that have sternum mobility issues. Some of them are really compressed. Some of them are really matted down because they're so overactive through these muscles through the front here that they can't get good expansion. I'm not joking around with you. It's no excuse. It's something they need to work on. Rib cage mobility has been attributed to a lot of things that can become problems later in life. How the lungs are able to expand, compression on the heart. So that rib cage mobility only gets less and less if it's starting out that way at whatever age you're referring to, whether it's you or your husband or somebody like that. So being able to get, and this is some of the stuff that Katie will be able to guide you through with their assessments, is to say, do I need more chest expansion with my breathing, or do I need more back expansion with my breathing? I'm assuming that's some of the stuff that'll be gone through. And then you can identify for yourself or whoever it is you're talking about the ability to be able to get that to happen. So stretching will feel good to that person because it's kind of feeding into that compression. And I'm not saying they shouldn't do it if it feels good, but there are people that I say, I got to teach you to learn to open that chest up a little bit. And there are other strategies I would go through that would help to open that up a little bit more to supplement any stretching that they might want to do. Because again, the front and back are supposed to kind of open up together. There are more, not knowing what you're referring to, Ivana, was it Ivana? Not knowing what you're referring to, there are more extreme cases, like people with like Marfan syndrome and people who have really, truly anatomically depressed ones. They still need to work on it. I literally had a guy yesterday, I don't know if this helps at all, who's so compressed, I put him on his side, I put folded towels underneath his side that's on the table, and I got up on the table and I smushed him from the side. So I said, I'm just gonna smush you for a couple minutes and we're just gonna work on your ability to get this to go open front to back, because this is part of your problem. And after 8, 10, 12, 15 breaths, it's like, he's like, great, I can feel that open up now. But their strategy likely is one of this lateralization or this compression this way. And so we got to teach them, like, we got to get you narrow. We got to bring you in. We got to get you to be able to kind of create this front to back expansion. And again, I'm sure some of the stuff you'll go through, we'll help them with that.
Yeah. Do you find that if you side lie them, then that works a little bit better because rectus is turned off more? Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I'm just talking about how aggressive sometimes I feel it's important. I think, hey, take a DVTR sandbag, put it on your side, lie there for a couple minutes. You know what I mean?
That's a good idea. Yeah.
Not the 85 pounders, but kind of get something on there just so that they can feel and appreciate it.
Smash them.
Like, exactly.
Some of
get
us
their baby, lodge your baby up there. You know what I mean? Like, it's just something to create a little bit of compression. And I literally have taught spouses to do it because like it just feels so good and it helps me to be able to be that much more successful with my activities when I do that first, because then everything's opened up and I'm not struggling as hard.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much, Mike. This was awesome. I loved your presentation. So neat to see it from that lens. I've never even thought about posture from, back as the Egyptians did. And it's very neat. So I greatly appreciate it. And I have all your info, which they've already gotten in an email, but I'll refer them back to it. Do you have any courses coming out soon? I feel like Jason mentioned you might be doing something soon.
Yeah.
Let me talk to you.
Yeah, I mean, I have a couple things I'm doing, like for the Perform Better is got something I'm doing Perform Better Brazil. It's supposed to be in all these places, but that's okay. There is a place. So if you go to a place, for those of you that are interested in the sleep thing, or I saw someone alluded to their child and mouth breathing and all that, there's a website called the Online Sleep Coach. Mm-hmm. And he's a colleague of mine, and I did a one-day program with him, and we also have kind of like a shortened snippet version of it that's on my website and on his website. So that might be something if you want to learn more about sleep. The reason it would be really good for some of you that are in the industry, for example, is because he really goes into sleep coaching and how to look through different ways to assess sleep, and gives a strong background of sleep and sleep components that influence its ability for you to be successful with coaching it, how to go about setting up a program. And that's what he does pretty much with his entire professional career now, is just kind of literally teach sleep coaching. So the Online Sleep Coach, you can probably get some more information there. I know he's got a course coming up. So I'm not trying to self-plug somebody else, but mine are kind of like a little more strewn about for these types of things.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah.
If anybody has any questions, please reach out to him, to Mike, and ask. He's always got some novel way of thinking of things. That's brilliant. So I
call it the MSU approach. It's the make shit up approach. It's pretty effective most of the time.
My favorite poster, I'm going to say this in 5 different biomechanical languages so everybody can participate. Those are my favorites.
I'll keep going with those. Awesome. Really nice to see everybody. Sorry to get a chance to meet you in person. Hopefully in the future. Enjoy the rest of your sessions.
Bye, Mike. Appreciate
Cheers.
it.
Thanks.